I know probably many people that watch this channel don't really get too enthused by, things like spiral dynamics and so forth, but I think that there are key indicators hidden in that theory that will suggest where our future is going. And I think it's even more revealing if you add in fractal dynamics. I mean, there's not empirical data on fractal dynamics, but it does make, to me, a lot more sense of even spiral dynamics. So when we look at, what spiral dynamics calls the first tier, which is the first 6 systems or first 6 developmental waves in spiral dynamics, that's in my system the 5th system. And the nature of the 5th system parallels the 5th system in spiral dynamics, which is orange. Orange has this quality of sort of monological science, sort of reductionalist science. It's a profound move in the cosmos, it seems, in the sense that, in and around the 17th century, when it kind of went mainstream, the individual's ability to sort of reason through things in a logical, empirical fashion became in vogue. It became kind of a popular thing to do. And in so doing, we got many of the wonders of that age, in the sense of like steam engines and locomotives and these sorts of things. It was through this kind of reductive, analytic, kind of empirical gaze in many respects, but monological is key in this sense, that allowed for those wonders to occur. The idea here that I'm presenting is that's kind of the emphasis of that whole fractal, as it were. The spiral dynamics primary focus in the 5th system, or the 5th super system in this case, all of what spiral dynamics kind of captures as the first tier, is that monological, empirical, logical gaze. And when we start to move into greed, we're starting to leave it, but we're still confused because we're still kind of within that 5th mega system. And so it becomes like this, relativistic in a sense, which is positive in certain regards, but negative in others, confusion in many respects. So we get the swamp. So a swamp of relativism. So here's the thing. The systems that we built through the whole first tier, through all those first 6 systems, have a centralized nexus of control. And, you might even argue, in some sense, from my deep research, that control has been more and more centralized to the point in which it seems there's only a few people kind of controlling most of the mechanisms through a top-down command line system. On this planet, in many respects. You can just think of, like, for example, the telephone companies, or what's a better example? When you really look into most of the mega corporations in and through the governments and intertwined with them, there's oftentimes very few people controlling vast swaths of resources. And we don't know how high and how consolidated that is, but it does seem very, very consolidated, and therefore very, very centralized. If my theory is right, it points to something quite interesting, and that's that what green reveals is this kind of relativism, right? It kind of suggests there is this kind of multiculturalist pluralism in the nature of things, and that's the 6th system of the first tier, or the 6th system in my 5th fractal. But it hints at what's coming next, perhaps, if my theory is right, and that is to say that the 2nd tier, or my 6th megafractal, is in essence a fractal resemblance to the 6th system, which is green. And so it has this kind of, it's more, the primary focus moves from a monological exterior gaze to a systems exterior gaze. In Ken Wilber's 4-quadrant theory, there's the notion of there being kind of 4 fundamental perspectives, and it really can twist and turn to 8, but there's kind of 4, which kind of cross-correlate with subjectivity, intersubjectivity, objectivity, and interobjectivity. So if you look at the 5th mega fractal as being kind of objectivity proper, the movement to the 6th mega fractal, or the 2nd tier, is in essence, in my opinion, the move to interobjectivity. So in that sense, decentralization becomes the primary focus. But notice here, and I can't articulate this easily, but we start in a far more primitive version of that as we kind of collapse back, unfortunately, as those centralized systems collapse under the weight of their inability to function in a systemic way, in many respects, to deal with pretty much nature and what's nature's pushing up against it. They collapse back. You know, in that sense, you can look at it this way. Our systems on this planet are finite, and there becomes a point in which the financial construct, or the abstraction that is this kind of monological gaze, can no longer project itself onto nature in the way that it had been to keep itself functioning, and therefore nature, in that sense, pushes back against it. And I mean, I'm kind of being metaphorical here, but I think I'm kind of not in some sense. And therefore, the centralized systems break down. And it's an unfortunate and tragic aspect, I think, to the nature of the universe. But it seems like a logical, almost a theological, unfortunately, response to something that's gone too far and too long, and it's causing too much pain and too much damage. And there needs to be a natural response to it, which is kind of, in that sense, a breakdown, but it's a breakdown to enhance everything through the process of that breakdown, which will be, unfortunately, in its very nature, chaotic, because these centralized structures have held us like a baby in many respects into adulthood, safeguarding us from many of the woes that would be resultant from the kinds of actions that we've been putting on the world in many respects. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. It does allow for a lot of certain kinds of creativity and certain kinds of advancements that wouldn't be possible if it hadn't been, that construct hadn't been built. But at some point, there needs to be a resetting, in my opinion, of that construct. So to me, you know, the caring response that I provide here is that this seems like the nature of things. And at some point, it has to kind of reset and rebuild. And I'm not looking forward to it any more than I don't think almost anybody would be. It wouldn't, and it probably won't be, a very fun process if my logic is right. But it's also important, I think, for those willing to hear, to kind of get your feet on the ground and kind of get moving in the context of what is developing around you, so that you can be in functional flows to the natural surroundings and have some wisdom in the context of that. And so the chaos won't affect you as much because you've autonomously taken on the notion of this, and you're kind of dealing with it in real time in a more responsive and productive way than had you kind of resisted the notion that this is sort of natural flows. This is kind of a natural contour to the nature of things. So spiral dynamics does postulate that, unfortunately, in some sense, because it is a sad, kind of tragic thing, that there is this notion wherein we move back to survival modes. Beige is kind of focused on survival context, and I would say that survival context within a monological sort of logical focus, you know, sort of pre-ego in the sense of, like, you know, a self-defined I context as a logical abstraction, but still primary focus kind of being potentially survival if our history serves us well. And there's some question marks there, but yeah, so in this sense, we have the ability to have all that in-game knowledge of the abstractions of the I context, but now we're kind of rebuilding the construct of what it means to be an I in a more decentralized context, and this is a virtualized context that we're building, and so forth. So hopefully, if my theorizing's right, this won't be as catastrophic as, you know, previous systems, because we have all these inbuilt technologies that can support us a little bit better than had previously been available to us. But it doesn't mean it won't be hard. I think that, you know, building up things like, you know, learning to garden, and I'm not very good at that myself, but things that are simple and almost agrarian in nature will probably serve you quite well through a time when, you can think of it as like the supply routes. When they start to break down, we only have like 3 days of grocery food in the grocery stores. So, therefore, if you want to eat, potentially you might have to grow it yourself or find some way to get it. I don't know. But it would be a lot better, hopefully, if you had it for yourself. Although, of course, there's certain worries that come along with that too. But so I'm just trying to say that, although this is catastrophic, and I in many respects pray that it doesn't happen. Although I do think that we need, some big things need to be shifted in some respects. But to me, this seems like a natural flow of the nature of things. What happens at the end of the sixth system, I don't know. Maybe something like the biblical notion of ascendancy. I don't know. Goodness gracious, I don't know. But to me, at this juncture, I feel fairly confident about this shift. And that shift is into a more decentralized construct for the benefits of our natural and social, primarily, worlds. And also, I think, benefits to our psychological realities. Because this construct, again, I think, due to the fact it's been prolonged so long, is in many respects pathological. But the monumental leap or transition, if this is true, is monumental and painful, if so also, and comes with kind of a bit of a catastrophic breakdown. So I don't know if that's, it probably isn't soothing to hear that sort of thinking, but I hope it's at least helpful in your thinking and looking and preparing for the world. All the best.